I'd like to introduce Juliet Aristides. Juliet is a Seattle-based painter who seeks to understand and convey the human spirit through art, actively dedicated to rebuilding a traditional arts education in the United States. Aristides is the founder and instructor at Aristides Atelier at Gage Academy of Fine Art in Seattle, Washington. Aristides teaches workshops both nationally and internationally. She is an author of several instructive books on classical drawing and painting. She exhibits nationally, and her work has been featured in various prominent publications. Please help me welcome Juliet Aristides to speak about beauty as a portal to meaning.
Thanks very much for having me, and thanks, Kathleen, for all your hard work and for the Catholic Arts Guild. I'm delighted to be here. So today we're going to talk about art as a portal to meaning, and I wanted to start off talking about a conversation I had with my father. I was in Philadelphia this past summer, and I was teaching a workshop, and I had one day that I had free. And so I met him, and we had allocated the entire day to talking about beauty because he was interested in this conference. And so, just being my dad, we're going to take 5 hours and go over this. So we met for breakfast, and we compared notes, and then we went for a walk, and midway through, we started realizing our differences. We started debating, and a few minutes after that, we were embroiled in a huge argument. And it all came to a head in front of this building. I snapped it with my cell phone, so it's not a great shot. Philadelphia, the home of neoclassical architecture. So I said to my dad, certainly the neoclassical building is more beautiful than the stained wall. And he said, no, it's not. It's not. I like the wall better. And the heart of our argument went, one of us thought that beauty is external and objective, can be pointed to. And the other thought that beauty is just a projection of a mind on a chaotic world. And we agreed to disagree and left it at that. So why are discussions on beauty so fraught? How could I end up in an argument with my own father about something as esoteric as beauty? Have you ever had a conversation with anyone on beauty? It's hard not to step on sensitive areas. And the reason is, I think, because beauty ends up being a shorthand for meaning. And it exposes very quickly how we believe, what we believe about the world, what we think is true, how we see ourselves, and what is valuable. And I'd like to, sorry, I think I just turned it off. So who to invite to our argument and decide between us? So I'm going to call Thomas Couture, who is a 19th century French academician who loved beauty and art, and he taught a lot. So he told his students, I'm going to teach you the secret of beauty and art and nature, and what I tell you will change your life. So he said, behold, I'm going to pull back the curtain, and what's behind the curtain? Nothing. Nothing is behind the curtain. Because unless you have the eyes to see it, it doesn't matter what we put in front of you, you're not going to be able to recognize it. So this afternoon, I'd like to touch on 3 aspects of beauty. 1, why is beauty so important? Why does it change lives? Why is it sometimes a matter of life and death? 2, what are the obstacles to seeing beauty? Why is it often so difficult to see? And 3, how can we cultivate more of it in our lives? So the first point, what's so important about beauty? There's a very big difference between seeing and observing. So how many of you, have you ever experienced that you're looking for your car keys, you're in a hurry, you search everywhere in the house for them and you can't find them? Has it ever happened? And then you end up finding it in a place you remember looking. And so even yesterday, a few of us were walking up the stairs to the church, and there was a huge sign saying, use the other door. And we didn't recognize the sign until we pulled on the door and we're like, oh yeah, there's a sign right there, but we didn't see it. So there's a lot of studies done on the nature of perception, of how we recognize and what we see as being important and valuable. And one of my favorite studies was done a decade ago, and it was sponsored by the Washington Post. And they wanted to see if beauty would be recognized if you removed it from an expected context. So certain places you go, you expect to see beauty, and you do. And then other times, would you still see it if the context was removed? So they took the most famous violinist, one of the most famous of the day, and with his $4 million Stradivarius, and he had a repertoire playing Bach, and they put him in the Washington subway at rush hour. I'm sure many of you are familiar with what happened. So they were sitting with the editors trying to decide, well, what's going to happen when we put him in there, disguise him as a busker, and thousands of people going past, and they envisioned the worst, crowds of people hoarding around, pressing up against one another to see him. They were going to have to call the police, rubber bullets, who knows what's going to happen. Well, nobody cared. He made $28 at the end of the hour. Over 1,000 people walked by. One person had the commute of their life when they realized that they saw it, they recognized it, they stopped, and they were entranced. Everyone else had an ordinary day. So if Joshua Bell was in a concert hall like he was 2 nights before, and people paid $100 a seat for the cheap ones, he would not have been missed. There's no way to not see him. And likewise, if we pay money, so I was here last weekend, $25 entrance fee to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and you climb up the stairs, and at the top of it is Tiepolo, a museum, home of the muses. We go to be inspired, and it is so important, and these experiences are absolutely transcendent. But if we have the ability to see the beauty there, can we see it in other contexts? So here we have a Caspar Friedrichs painting of a sunset. How many of us are going to miss a glowing orb of rainbow-colored fire? Not many. So many of us can go into nature and have an encounter with beauty, right? I mean, it's a free gift from God. You don't need any particular intelligence. You raise up your hand and you grab the gift. Thank you very much. But if we can see that beauty, can we see also the beauty of a crumpled leaf? Or I'm in Seattle, we don't get to see setting sun. We see raindrops and puddles. Are we able to see the beauty in that? If we're able to see the perfect symmetry of a baby's face and rejoice in that beauty, can we also see the beauty of a stroke victim and the asymmetry that creeps in there? So for me, I love high art. But most of my moments that I experience beauty in the day are very small. I'll pour cream into my coffee, and it will form a whirlpool galaxy as it spins round. One of experiences that I had that stayed with me was from last winter. Seattle, an hour and a half from the city, is a small town of Clayome, and you go for a little bit of a retreat. And I left it's nighttime, and I left something in my car. I had to go get it. So I stepped out of my hotel room, and I'm walking, and I realize it's dark. It's really dark. And in Seattle, it never gets that dark. And it was quiet because everything was covered with a mountain of snow. I never get to hear that kind of silence. And as I turned my flashlight up, the snowflakes, it danced the wrong direction. It went up instead of down, and I felt like I was on holy ground. I had never wanted that moment to end. And so, have you experienced that? You have, right? You absolutely have. I can say today probably you had a moment, could have been the leaf or whatever, a well-made sandwich, but you noticed. What did you feel in that moment when you noticed something was beautiful and unexpected? What did you feel? You felt captivated. Anybody else? You felt joy, yeah. Yeah, exactly. We're inspired, and we seem to lose touch with the past. We're not worried about the past for that moment, and we're not worried about tomorrow. We're experiencing one moment fully and completely. And I'd like to suggest to you that that is the origin of art, comes from that moment. The writer Joseph Conrad described it so well. He said, let's see where I have it, to arrest for the space of a breath, to stop for a moment, right? Hands busy about the work of the earth, and compel men entranced by distant goals to stop, to pause and look. Such is the aim of art. Can you believe that? One of the greatest writers who ever wrote said the aim of art is not art, but to stop and look. And Proust said likewise, the supreme effort of the writer, as of the artist, partially raises the veil and says, look, look, and learn to see. And if you read writers like Orwell and Hemingway and Tolstoy, who are way more articulate than your average visual artist, they also describe that exact same thing, the thing you felt. But they're able to convey it. And let's go deeper still, because beauty, we know, is not only about appreciation. There's moments when beauty becomes sublime. I'd like to bring up the great writer of the sublime, Kenneth Grahame, whose pivotal work, Wind in the Willows, catalogs the sublime experience. So it's a children's book, and the protagonists are Water Rat and Mole. And Water Rat had been to Otter's house for dinner. And at that time, he found out that Otter's son had been missing, and for several days, and Otter was worried out of his mind. So it was clear no one was going to get any sleep that night. So Water Rat and Mole, they hopped in a boat and they went about searching. And it was quiet and it was dark and they were busy about the work of the earth. But then something strange happened. Rat stood perfectly still and he started listening, and all around them things started changing. They could see the horizon start to glow. All of a sudden they could make out trees. They could see the moon. And Rat said something very interesting. Oh, Mole, the beauty of it. The thin call of distant piping, so beautiful and strange and new, it has roused a longing in me that is pain, and nothing seems worthwhile but to listen to it forever. Such sweet music I never dreamt of, and the call in it is stronger than even the music is sweet. Row on, Mole, row, row, because the music and the call must be for us. Strange in a children's book, but I've heard that call, and you have too, and that's exactly why we're all here. We've received the call, and for me, when I was a teenager out in the woods of Pennsylvania, I had an experience of beauty, and I never wanted to leave it. And for all of us who heard Mozart's Requiem Friday night, we understand the longing that is pain, and nothing seems worthwhile but to listen to it forever. The sublime, as Lewis said, the scent of a flower we haven't found, the echo of a tune we haven't heard, news from a country we've never visited. So if beauty links us to our lives more deeply every day, it is a source of art and it's a conduit to the divine. Why don't we spend our entire life in that state of bliss? We could choose to, right? Well, I'll give you one small reason. 2 weeks ago, my daughter put diesel fuel in our unleaded car. That's one reason. So let's be honest, real life is hard. There was no beauty that day. Or maybe you shop at the same Safeway I do. Or your school was designed by a brutalist architect. Or you're that girl. Life is hard, and that's only the external things. What happens about what's when our internal lives stop us from seeing beauty? I live near a 3-mile-around lake in Seattle. It's so wonderful. You can start on one end, and an hour later have had this hour of meditation. It's beautiful, but I was walking around, and I saw out of nowhere this giant confession board. It was the strangest thing. So I went up to take a look at it, and, you know, these are well-dressed, affluent people. And on there was the most it was so, somebody wrote, "I hated that my wife kept her affair from me until she got cancer." How do you see beauty like that? My dad died when I was 13. I'm 30, and I still miss him so much. Sometimes our eyes grow dark because our hearts are heavy. And if we as adults feel it, children don't have the experience to contextualize the way we do. And we don't do a great job of protecting them, really. This year, there was a New York Times bestseller called Ready Player One, and Steven Spielberg made it into a movie. It was the 8th highest grossing film of this year. And in it, I read something that was shocking. This is written by the 18-year-old named Wade. He said, "Here's the deal. Human civilization is in decline. Some people even say it's collapsing. And you probably wonder what's going to happen to you. That's easy. You're going to die, just like everybody else. And what happens when you die? The evidence suggests nothing. You're just dead. Those stories you heard about heaven, total blank, just like all the God stuff. So now you have to live the rest of your life knowing you're going to die and disappear forever. Sorry, that's the start of the book. It has nothing to do with theology. This is conventional wisdom in our culture." Kenneth Clark writes about the nature of civilization. He said it looks very strong, but actually it's quite fragile. There's many things to destroy it, and one is an erosion in our own beliefs and the inheritance that we pass on. This is Pietro Annigoni describing something similar. And there's a cost. If you took every kid in the Seattle public schools from K through 12 and you snapped your fingers and had them disappear, that's how many people commit suicide every year, up 25%. And for every one who succeed, there's 20 who try. And middle schoolers are just as likely to die from suicide as car accident. It's the #1 killer of children themselves. How can we create a culture that makes people want to be a part of it? And why should we support beauty? Because many people see things in their lives that are not worth living for. They have trouble seeing beauty in their lives. David White, the poet, wrote that there's a value to sorrow. He didn't write this thing. This is MacDonald, as in all the sweetest music, a tinge of sadness was in every note, nor do we know how much the pleasures, even of life, we owe to intermingled sorrows. If we choose to not opt out, if we choose to engage with the sadness in our culture and create art, because art is a way to connect. It's a portal for meaning, and it's a way to transform our experiences. So David White wrote, "For many of us, it's hard to begin a journey of the soul, because for many of us, the journey begins in a place we've been taught to have very little faith. The black, contemplative splendors of self-doubt. The uninitiated might call it depression. When we pathologize sadness which is the appropriate response, it's a sign that something's wrong, and it gives us the energy to fix it." He goes on to say, as we go inward, we realize that much of it is actually not depression. It's a cry for something else, a need for rest, contemplation, or perhaps a different kind of life. If we don't, and so I would say if we don't medicate but we engage and we don't try to escape, we can transform our sorrows as if through fire. And for those of you, you know what I'm talking about because you've done it yourself. So if beauty is a way to gain meaning from our life, it connects us to great art, it's a portal to the divine, and without it, we lose a reason to get up in the morning. How can we start to cultivate more of it? This conference is dedicated, I believe, in part to helping us see more of it. And in the presentations, we're finding out all about it. And in the church on Friday night, it's electrifying the way you're able to bring it together and even without words, show how beauty can connect to the culture. But my background is in drawing and painting. I've spent the last 30 years trying to drum up interest in traditional drawing and painting, and it's called the atelier movement. It's a studio movement, which means that if you have the interest in learning to draw, you can show up and we'll show you how. Why drawing? The interesting thing about drawing is it's like writing poetry, it's like meditation, it's like deep listening. It helps us think. It helps us slow down, helps us connect to the life that is ours. And it can be taught, just like writing can be taught. So I'm going to do just a quick digression to show you my studio school in Seattle, where people show up and we connect them. This is some of my students. We have a connection with the museum where they can do master copies to study great painting of the past. This is my student Joshua Langstaff, who did a copy of Rembrandt and then tried to apply it to a portrait of a model. So using the past to link to the future. And then contemporary work. This fellow did marvelous paintings of himself and his family. And Rebecca, we were talking with Ethan about hands. This is a portrait of her mother showing a life well lived just through her hands. This was done last year by my student, Jonathan. The center figures are his wife and daughters, and they lived through Katrina, and so he wanted to culminate his training to honor what they've been through. So I'd like to just round out to bring this home to you who are not visual painters and visual artists. We have other traditions of deep looking, and I'd like to bring up just two quickly. One, an American, Henry David Thoreau, who wrote 2 million words about what it was like to step out his front door. He wrote about everything from puddles, we could say, and birds and tortoises. He drove people crazy because he didn't love commerce, he loved looking. And so he described one thing that I thought was hilarious. He was looking at a piece of grass, and he couldn't understand there's a little bit of white at the end of it, this crystalline sort of root structure. And he said, examining it, feeling it, and tasting it. I mean, can you imagine this guy tasting it? It impressed me that the very grass we trample on, the most delicate and magical processes are going on. The half isn't shown. And across to Europe, you have, and someone who wasn't poor like Thoreau, but very wealthy, John Ruskin, the tastemaker, critic, and conservationist of his time, said something similar. I used to lie down on the grass and draw the blades as they grew until every square foot became a possession to me. And he encouraged us. He said, gather a single blade of grass and examine it for a minute. Be there any man so deeply loved by God, so highly graced as that narrow point of green? Now, you might think that's humility, but I think that's arrogance, and I think that's fighting words. Because he's saying, okay, yeah, so you see beauty in a rainbow. I take the most boring piece of vegetation that exists on God's green earth, and I'm holding it up and say, you can see the face of God through this. Amazing, absolutely amazing. So I would like to leave you with just a quick story. My friend Will was given the challenge to teach a group of preschoolers about God, and he was terrified. He didn't know how to do it, so he took a line from the Talmud, and he said, every blade of grass has an angel that whispers above it, grow, grow. And he sent the kids out to look for the angels. And he said within 5 minutes, every kid had found an angel. Somehow, he said they found it because they were looking for one, and they found it. And so if we invite Thomas Couture, our 19th century academician, back, and had him draw the curtain back on art and beauty, and behind that curtain we saw our life, would we find it beautiful? And he said, if you look at anything quickly, it's just ordinary. But if you slow down and look deeply, you'll see the sublime. The half isn't shown. Thank you very much.